hour of the show, we're going to concentrate on one topic majorly, and that's ME, chronic fatigue syndrome.
It was almost impossible to get around, and I was exhausted and in pain, and it was quite a frightening time.
Well, that's Julie Raymer there, who took her treatment into her own hands. We're going to be hearing more from her in just a moment, so do stick with us for that. But does what she says ring true to you? We'd love to hear your experience of ME. The phone lines are open for the next hour. Tell us, what was your diagnosis like? Did you agree with the diagnosis? What kind of conversations have you had with health professionals about your ME and the management of your condition? There do seem to be contradictory strains of thoughts on this. 0500 92 95 00 is the number to call. You can text us on 80295.
Your calls, your stories. Mornings with Kaye Adams on BBC Radio Scotland.
And it was back in September that we decided to take a look at new research into ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a condition that is often dismissed as being all in the mind, and I'm very careful of saying that because I know there's lots of people out there who have already got in touch who'll be going, oh God, please don't repeat that again. But you will be familiar with that kind of characterisation. But this research was showing that people with symptoms do have a specific chemical signature in their blood, which was news received very enthusiastically by the ME community, if there is such a thing, clearly hungry for a greater understanding of the condition. And we got such a huge response that we're opening the phone lines again. So please do get in touch. 0500 92 95 00 is the number to call. Was speaking to Hilary Dayton earlier on, and she referred to a very large study which was called the PACE study. It was published 4 years ago in The Lancet, and it advises graded exercise therapy for patients, basically building up your physical activity in conjunction with cognitive behaviour therapy. A controversial piece of work. Many people feel that it was not a fair assessment of what is going on. And the woman I'm just about to speak to, well, actually I spoke to her last week. She's based in Santa Fe in the States. She's a maths and science teacher there. Let's listen to this interview, and you'll hear that Julie takes issue with that advice.
It was 2006 that I first got seriously ill.
So what sort of symptoms were you displaying then, Julie?
I had a great deal of difficulty walking. It was as if my nerve signals just didn't reach my legs. So I staggered and groaned, and it was almost impossible to get around, and I was exhausted and in pain, and it was quite a frightening time.
And presumably you sought medical help?
I did. I went to a neurologist, and he was the person who diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome. And when he diagnosed me, he had no treatments, no doctors, no tests, nothing. And it was pretty clear to me that it basically meant, please get out of my office.
Right. So how do you respond in that situation? I mean, you sound as if, got some very, very debilitating symptoms, no real positive guidance from a doctor.
Right.
What do you do?
Well, I went home and I started reading about chronic fatigue syndrome, and I rapidly found just through experience that if I did too much, that my symptoms were very much worse. So, for example, I had a good day one day and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to go to the grocery store. And by the time I was done with my grocery shopping, I was utterly exhausted and shaking. And then that night, I couldn't even make it to the bathroom. Couldn't turn over in bed, in fact. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. I realized, what I really have to do is manage how much I do and make sure I don't overdo it. And so for the next several years, by just being very, very careful about my exercise and overall activity levels, then I managed to kind of have a reasonably functional life.
And so this was all self-management, was it?
It was, yeah. I went to other doctors, but never felt like they had a whole lot to offer. at some point I just felt like, okay, going to doctors is taking a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy. I don't have surfeit of any of those. So I just kind of gave up on doctors.
And of course, the recommendations that are most commonly advised here, and this was a piece that was published in the Lancet, are that people suffering from this condition, should take moderate exercise, try and build it up a little bit, and also psychotherapy.
Yeah, the big trial of that research came out in 2011, and I was really shocked when I saw it because it just did not fit with my experience at all. I love exercise. Even after I was sick, I didn't give up exercise completely, but the thing that I learned was that I had to give up on the idea that I was going to build it up and that I could do a little more today than I did yesterday, or even as much today as I did yesterday. So in particular, what I learned was the moment that I thought, I'm a little tired, that was the sign I needed to stop immediately. And if I ignored that and thought, well, yesterday I did 10 more minutes, so I'm going to keep going, it's just a bad moment or whatever, I just need to push through, then I really suffered the consequences.
Did you have any sense when you became aware of this piece of research that you were kind of going against recommendations? I mean, how did you feel when this was published?
I was pretty shocked when it was published. I'm a science writer, so I respect and believe in science, but the results just didn't make any sense to me at all. They were so contrary to my experience. And at the time it came out, I was actually at my sickest and was bedbound about half the time. I pretty much put it out of my mind for some time to come. But then bit by bit, I looked into it because I just sort of couldn't believe it. It was this big study in the Lancet, 5 million pounds. It just seemed like it should be a really good study. And I couldn't understand how it could come up with results that just made no sense to me at all. So I started researching it, and there were a bunch of patients who were way ahead of me in figuring all of this out. So I learned a lot from them about it, and I was completely shocked at the flaws in this trial.
So what was it that gave you cause for concern?
Well, the most striking thing is they claimed that 22% of patients recovered using graded exercise or cognitive behavioral therapy, which just seemed amazing. And it turns out they defined recovery so weakly that you could enter the trial, get worse over the course of the trial, and their two main measures, and they could still say that you had recovered.
Of course, the vast majority of people are not going to read into a report like that in such detail or question it in the way that you did or were able to Julie. And they'll take the headline, won't they, that, okay, I've got this condition and what I need to do is exercise more and to have psychotherapy.
That's absolutely right.
And do you think that has contributed in some ways to the way that people have dealt with their condition and felt about having the condition?
Absolutely. It's contributed in huge ways to doctors' impression that the disease is primarily psychological. And many patients feel that they've been harmed by graded exercise therapy in surveys, patient after patient. I think in one survey, 74% of patients said that they felt worse after a course of graded exercise therapy than they had before. And many of these patients say they feel much worse. That they, for example, went from housebound to bedbound.
And how about the psychotherapy element?
So patients are told that they don't really have an illness that limits their ability to exercise. That's just a false belief that they need to get over. Instead, they just need to get more active, they need to get over their fear of exercise, and then they'll be fine.
I mean, it's the interesting thing, isn't it, about medical studies? I mean, because they are generally conducted by very learned people and with the very best of intentions, that they're generally taken to have some weight. But, they are a study and they will often be contradicted. And clearly, you have looked into this and you don't agree with the study or the findings.
Right.
What's your understanding now of your condition?
Basically, there are a collection of kind of physiological insults that build up, and something breaks, and we really don't know what that something is. But it seems as though there are different insults that make the difference for different patients. So some patients get a really bad virus, some patients get a toxic exposure, some patients are in a car accident, have surgery, and you get enough of these insults and it kind of overwhelms the body and something breaks. At this point, we don't have very good treatments. And as a patient, it's a matter of managing it skillfully and supporting your body to maximize its opportunity to heal itself, since we can't do that for it.
And where are you on that line?
I'm actually doing very, very much better. For myself, I ended up pursuing an approach that I thought was pretty crazy, but worked out really well for me. I took extreme measures to avoid mold. It had really amazingly huge benefits for me.
So mold as in dampness?
Yes.
All right, okay.
Very quickly, I went from being bedbound about half the time to being able to walk up a 400-foot hill.
Wow.
It was really, really astonishing. I'm not saying that's the problem for every patient.
Sure.
But for me, it's quite clear that if I successfully avoid mold, then I feel very, very much better.
And if you had a message that you wanted to get out there, about ME, about this condition?
It's not psychological. It's not being out of shape. It's very serious, very debilitating. And the first thing patients should learn about this disease is that they need to be really, really careful not to overdo it. That's the key to managing it.
Well, there you go. That is Julie Raymer there, giving her experience of living with ME. She's actually written a book about her experiences. It's called Through the Shadowlands, and it will be out in May next year. And as you would have heard there, she is very critical of this very large study called the PACE study, and I know lots of people who have got direct knowledge of ME will be familiar with that. So let me just read a statement here from the co-author of that study, Professor Peter White. He said the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, that's NICE, recommended both cognitive behaviour therapy and graded exercise therapy for patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis in 2007, and that's what Julie explained. The PACE trial, published 4 years later in The Lancet, confirmed these recommendations, finding that they were more effective and as safe as specialist medical care and therapy. That having been said, these treatments do not help everyone, and we need more research into the causes and other treatments of this most disabling and neglected illness. So leaving lots of room there for alternative analysis of this condition. And that's why we've got the phone lines open to get your experience this morning. 0500 92 95 00. Your experience of the condition, of getting a diagnosis, what kind of advice were you given in terms of managing or indeed treating the condition, and is it working for you, or like Julie Raymer there, are you going your own way with it and finding potentially a more successful path? So do get in touch, 0500 92 95 00, or you can text us 80295. We are going to be speaking to Dr. Charles Shepherd, who is a medical advisor to the ME Association, and be really interested, of course, to get his thoughts on what Julie was saying there. So we'll come right back to him after this.
She was incredibly formidable. She is just kind of without fear.
A champion of women's rights, birth control pioneer, and even today hugely controversial for some of her views about who should have babies.
Well, you're talking about your mother-in-law, and she was trying to create the perfect child.
Had it not been for me, she would have succeeded.
Susan Morrison looks at the life of Mary Stopes, the scientist who dared to publish Married Love, one of the most scandalous books in history.
You do get men writing to Stopes saying, I really want my wife to enjoy marital pleasures.
Women with a past.
She changed the world for the women of today.
Tomorrow at 1:30 on BBC Radio Scotland.
Get in touch with BBC Radio Scotland. You can call 0500 92 95 00. Calls are free for most landlines. Some networks and mobile operators will charge for these calls. You can text 80295. Network charges apply. This is BBC Radio Scotland.
And you're listening to the Kaye Adams programme on BBC Radio Scotland. We're here with you to 12, and up until then we're going to be talking about ME and your experiences of ME. We have already got a stack full of calls lined up. We were listening there to Julie Raymayer, who is a science writer, but she is about to publish a book called Through the Shadowlands, which is basically giving her experience of the condition. She first experienced symptoms, very, very debilitating symptoms back in 2002. She's living in the States, but over there she didn't feel that the doctor's advice was particularly helpful. She basically gave up on doctors, she said. And she's had a very strong reaction to this study called the PACE trial, published in the Lancet 4 years ago, which suggested a gradation of exercise, building up exercise as well as psychotherapy. She feels that that's contrary to her experience and was not helpful to her. When her symptoms were really, really bad, she said that she had to just let herself give in to it to a certain extent, and it was counterproductive to try and push the exercise. What's worked for her, she says, is she has identified that she seems to have a fairly extreme reaction to mould or dampness, and since taking concerted efforts to avoid that, she has seen a great improvement in her condition. So we're interested in your experience of getting a diagnosis, the advice you were given, and how that actually matches up with your real experience. I see Victoria's on the line. Speak to you in just a second, Victoria. But I need to speak to Dr. Charles Shepherd, medical advisor to the ME Association. Morning, Charles.
Good morning, Kay.
Good morning. And you joined us a couple of months ago when we were talking about this for the first time. So thanks very much for coming back. Did you manage to listen to Julie's interview there?
Yeah, I did. Before we start, I'll just add that I'm a doc with personal experience of this illness, so I very much sympathise with the points Julie's been making, and I think she provided an excellent summary of many of the key points surrounding this illness, the problems of getting a diagnosis. I mean, she was lucky she went to see a neurologist who could give her a diagnosis, but this is something we may return to later. It really is appalling, the situation in Scotland for people because of the lack of medical education at very much a primary care level.
Particularly in Scotland, are you saying, Charles?
Particularly in Scotland. We have a website directory of all the NHS referral services that people can be sent to for diagnosis and help with management throughout the UK. And I was looking at this last night. There are 4 services for the whole of Scotland. And in actual fact, none of these services are providing what we believe should be provided, which is a physician-led multidisciplinary service that can provide an accurate diagnosis of this illness and then provide sensible and appropriate help with management. I just take one. There's a fatigue management program in Stornoway, but it's not a specific service for people with ME.
Right. Okay.
And we go back 10 years, roundabout as Julie's interview was saying. We had this nice guideline, which is a seriously flawed guideline. We believe at the MEA that this is not fit for purpose. That was published in 2007. The NICE guideline doesn't strictly apply to Scotland, but Scottish doctors, unfortunately, take a lot of notice of the NICE guideline. And at the same time, in parallel, I worked with a very good GP, Dr. Gregor Purdy from Dumfries, in trying to get some Scottish guidance, and this resulted in the Scottish Good Practice Statement being published. And that was designed to get the ball rolling in Scotland, to get medical education going, to get good services set up for patients. And my feeling from feedback from people in Scotland, that the situation has probably gone backwards since then.
So you're clearly critical also of the advice from this particular study, which is to build up exercise and activity levels and also to combine that with cognitive behavioural therapy. I mean, yes. Julie's experience, she feels, was that actually it was counterproductive, not only not helpful, but counterproductive.
That's so. I mean, the NICE guidelines say this goes back to 2007. It was published before the PACE trial was actually in full swing and the results were published. But what we regard as seriously flawed results from the PACE trial have been used by NICE to justify a decision not to make any changes to the NICE guideline. We are constantly going on at NICE that this guideline has to be revised because, as Julia said, the PACE trial results, I believe, are seriously flawed. The reanalysis of these results has cast really very serious doubt on the recovery rates. And more importantly, as she did refer to, if you do patient surveys, and the MEA has done the largest ever patient survey of CBT, graded exercise and pacing, it covered 1,428 participants. CBT, 73% of people reported no effect on symptoms, but it's something that can help with coping with an illness like this, just as it can with cancer, multiple sclerosis. But it's not a treatment for this illness, as many of my medical colleagues wrongly believe. And more disturbingly is the figures for graded exercise, where in this particular survey, 74% of patients were made worse by graded exercise, and we have actually repeatedly called, it's banging your head against the brick wall, that we've repeatedly called on NICE to remove graded exercise as a recommended treatment from their guideline. So patients, as Julie said, they may get a diagnosis. In Scotland, it's not always easy getting a diagnosis, but invariably they're given a diagnosis. The doctor says he has nothing to offer in the way of drug treatment. The only treatments are these seriously flawed psychological therapies. Patients find that they're no effect, or they're even made worse by them, and as Julie said, they go off and have to self-manage their illness, which is perfectly unacceptable for a very serious neurological, long-term disabling condition.
Well, listen, Charles, we've got loads of calls on this, and so we'll dedicate the last half hour of the programme to them. We want to know from people what advice that they have had and how they are managing their symptoms. 0500 92 95 00. Julie also had some interesting things to say about what she believes the kind of causes of this condition and the triggers are. We can perhaps go to that as well. I'll speak to Victoria first, but let's just catch up with the travel first. With Ravi. Good morning, Ravi.
Very good morning to you, Kate. Let's kick off in Perth and Kinross, the earlier accident on the A822 westbound between the A9 Dunkeld and A826, which was affecting traffic between Dunkeld and Crieff. This route is now being cleared following an earlier accident. M74 South Lanarkshire, an earlier accident here as well, northbound between Junction 5 Wraith and Junction 6 Hamilton, still adding to congestion. Quite a busy area already because of the roadworks. It's lane 3 that's blocked and it's affecting traffic towards Glasgow. And on ScotRail, a fair number of alterations and cancellations continue between Glasgow, Queen Street and Edinburgh Waverley. This all down to a signal fault. Disruption currently expected to last until around 3 p.m. this afternoon. And signal problems also causing delays on ScotRail between Glasgow, Queen Street, Alloa, Dunblane and Stirling. Again, showing disruption till around 3 p.m. this afternoon. ScotRail, in fact, just tweeting that tickets are valid on all local bus services on the route shown on your tickets. This is valid for First Bus, Lothian buses and also on Edinburgh trams. And that's BBC Radio Scotland Travel, Kay.
Thank you very much, Ravi. John Beattie is here. He's looking very smart. He's all dressed with a white shirt and suit trousers. He's either meeting his bank manager or his probation officer.
He's going to a funeral.
He's
going to a funeral. A great man. A fantastic man called Jimmy Smith, who I've known since I was 15. And excuse me, went to Seaman Hospital maybe 6 months ago, and he was he just talked and told stories about the 1950s and the 1960s. And his last line to me was, as I was leaving, he said, listen, I can't see very well and I can't write anymore, so just please accept this conversation as thanks for your visit. Oh. He was a great man, so I'm off to his funeral.
So pay tribute to
fantastic bloke.
A good guy.
So we are going to be talking about this possible reduction in police stations. This East Kilbride football team, have you heard about this? Mm-hmm. They beat Ajax of Amsterdam's run of 27 unbeaten games. So Ajax sent a truck across with beer and they drove this van onto the middle of the pitch at the end of the game. Big surprise, opened the back. There was a wee guy on a computer who was uploading a live film of the game, and they gave East Kilbride whole crates of beer. So fantastic wee
Oh,
story.
nice gesture.
Yeah, and the man who started the career of speed skater Elise Christie, she's just won in Canada.
I heard that. That's fabulous.
And how to bluff your way through politics. Obviously.
Who wrote that book, John?
It's either you or me. All to do with Brexit and all the rest of it. So all that at 12 o'clock.
Interesting
Cheers, good to
stuff.
see you.
Thank you very much, John. Right, let's get to the calls. We're talking about ME this morning. I want to hear from you, your experience of getting a diagnosis and the advice that you were given, because there seems to be a lot of contradictory advice out there. Victoria, good morning to you, Victoria.
Good morning, Kate. Good morning, Scotland.
Thanks for your call.
So glad that I got through, because I want to offer some hope to the people suffering out there.
Well, good.
I have had variously been called different things, but classically every symptom you've discussed this morning for just over 21 years.
Okay.
I have been through every hoop, every medical, every cognitive behavioural. Nothing did any good. In fact, most of it made me quite a lot worse, to the point, like many of your callers, I stopped going to doctors because I figured they would kill me. They were trying to medicate me for things that even they, when cross-questioned, could not tell me from many tests why they wanted to give me the medications that they did, which were strong and were going to cause problems in their own right. However, my ray of hope to offer is that 2.5 years ago, I was put in touch with a doctor on the internet called Dr. Myhill. She is in Wales. I recommend people to go and Google her. She retired from NHS medicine because she was so disgusted that she was not being allowed to help people, and she works privately.
And now listen, Victoria, I'm just going to put in a wee disclaimer here to say, of course, that we could not recommend any kind of medical advice, but I'm delighted that you phoned in to give us your experience.
It comes through toxic gut syndrome and the Krebs cycle for not being able to metabolize the sugars through your diet. There is an aspect of gut health in this that when addressed, and I have been on a very restricted diet and 17 supplements a day, no medical treatments, no pharmacology. And it is like night and day.
So tell us the difference.
From the not knowing if I would be able to plan anything for the day after tomorrow, because I didn't know whether I would be able to stand up, for the pain in my joints, for the unreliability of my stomach, for the blinding migraines that made me sick every 20 minutes for 8 hours, that I then couldn't stand for 3 days, and that happened a couple of times a month, to the just not being able to think. CoQ10 I would recommend for people. It's a widely taken supplement, but it has helped hugely.
So how are you now, Victoria?
I am not 100%, but 3 years ago, I wasn't kidding myself that I thought I would die. I had got to the point of heart flutters every time I lay down. And I knew if I went near a doctor, they would hospitalise me and treat me for a heart condition, when that was not what was causing the problem. People have to take this into their own hands, but unfortunately, when I went to my GP and asked about her understanding of the route that I was about to take, she supported me absolutely, even was happy to draw the bloods for the tests.
Right.
But when she asked for their own medical support, the laboratories would not do the tests. They said they knew them, they recognised them, they were able to do them, but as they had no pharmaceutical treatment to prescribe, they weren't going to bother.
Victoria, let me bring in Dr. Charles Shepherd here. Charles, Victoria used the words of taking it into her own hands. Julie Raymeyer also, took her own, whether you call it treatment or management, into her own hands. In terms of the causes, Victoria, has told us what she feels that she's identified in her case. Julie was talking about a collection of physiological insults on the body, which could come via a virus, toxic exposure, trauma. For her, she feels that dampness is one of the key factors which exacerbates her condition. Are we considering all the options, do you think?
Right. I think when it comes to what causes this illness, we're dealing with a very complex set of interactions here. What we do know is, as Julie said, that in many, many cases this is an illness which affects perfectly fit people. They get an infection and then something goes wrong as a result of that infection. They don't recover from that infection. So some sort of assault on the body's immune system seems to be happening, which the immune system then is not afterwards performing in probably a correct manner. And this may be the trigger for the various different abnormalities that we then know seem to be occurring in this illness. We know at the moment that there is a complex collection of abnormalities which overlap to a degree. So there are brain abnormalities, in particular involving a part of the brain called the autonomic nervous system. We know that there's evidence of what we call neuroinflammation within the brain. That's low-level inflammation within the brain and the central nervous system. The immune system seems to be in a state of mild upregulation, as though you've got a sort of continuing dose of flu, and that may explain some of these abnormalities and symptoms which give a sort of flu-like picture, ongoing flu-like picture to this illness. And interestingly enough, there are a number of studies now, and I was involved in the first one actually at Oxford to demonstrate abnormalities in muscle. There are abnormalities in the way that the muscle, particularly part of the muscle called the mitochondria, produces energy, which helps to explain again why these patients have exercise-induced fatigue, they have muscle symptoms predominantly, and they have muscle pain. There are other abnormalities as well. So by trying to get a better handle on what is causing this disease, we're going to get through to better forms of treatment. Now, at the moment, there are very speculative forms of treatment. There are physicians in lots of different ologies coming up with ideas on different forms of treatment. None of these are as yet proven forms of treatment. They're very speculative forms of treatment. Some of them are being assessed in clinical trials. I have to say, in regard to sort of highly restrictive diets, I think people have got to be very careful with going on highly restrictive diets in this illness. They already have enough restrictions, in my opinion, on what they can and cannot do, and to add a restrictive diet to this requires a lot of careful thought.
Though I guess you can see how people get to the stage if they've had a condition for, I think, 22 years, Victoria was saying, and not only has nothing worked, but actually it's taken them to an even lower point that they feel. Well, you can absolutely see why people go with what they think is working best for them.
I fully understand, and we get a huge amount of anecdotal feedback from people who've been off on all kinds of different treatment regimes, some of them very, very complex. Some of them come back with very enthusiastic reports about particular treatment regimes. On the other hand, sadly, which is why one takes a very cautious approach to what are at the moment very speculative forms of treatment, people come back with tales of spending vast amounts of money, getting nowhere, and sometimes even being harmed by these approaches to treatment. Yeah. I would just say on Julie's point about mould, I mean, mould, if you've got mould in the house, then that's not a good idea if you've got any sort of condition. There's certainly some evidence that there is an allergic component to this illness, and certainly if you've got mould, then I would remove it. I'm not quite sure. I think the term was some sort of fairly extreme measures to remove mould, and I wouldn't want to go recommend that people start going down that track unless they actually have got definite evidence of mould in their house.
Charles, listen, thank you. I mean, I could speak to you for an hour, and we've got so many calls. So let's go back. We've got Rachel, and then we'll speak to James and William. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi. Rachel, I mean, what Charles was just saying there, that there's a great many different, potential treatment regimes out there, and he's kind of exercising a level of caution. But if we just come back to this PACE study, which I guess is as close as the medical establishment gets to some kind of consensus on this, graded exercise and CBT, you've actually sort of tried that programme, haven't you?
I have. When I first got unwell, I was working for the NHS as a psychotherapist, funnily enough, and through my occupational health service, they recommended I try CBT and graded exercise therapy. And I'd already done a lot of research into it at that point, but was willing to try anything because, it completely devastates your life. I went from working full-time and climbing mountains to hardly being able to get out of bed. So
Over what period of time, Rachel?
Well, I started getting, like lots of people say, I started getting lots of colds and flu viruses and allergies as well. I went through a period of having suddenly lots of allergic reactions to insect bites and stuff like that. But I got a cold in September 2011 and never really seemed to get better from it, and then got diagnosed the following January, and I was off work from December 2011. So about 3 months really before I, over the course, from when I say I developed ME to being in bed.
And it floored you, did it?
Absolutely, yeah. 5 years on, I use a wheelchair to get out now, and I'm pretty much housebound. I try and get out just once or twice a week if I can, to maintain. That just keeps my quality of life going,
And so how do you have a treatment program? You said that you tried the psychotherapy and the graded exercise.
That the CBT did nothing. Like Dr. Shepherd said, I think it's useful for anybody suffering from a chronic health condition to help you come to terms with your life being completely transformed. But that's it. It certainly doesn't help treat the actual condition. And graded exercise therapy was a complete waste of time. It made me worse. I was very cautious about it anyway, but wanted to, obviously occupational health, I wanted to appear like, I wanted to show that I was willing to take on board their suggestions, but it did make me worse.
So where does that leave you, Rachel?
Like your first caller said, I have since given up work, and I did try running my own business for a while and recently stopped that. So that removed a lot of pressure. So I pace myself, it's very confusing having the name of the study being the same as a management technique, but I try and just have a very low level of activity, and I don't go out very much, and I keep maintain a very stable routine. And the only support my GP, my GP's hands are tied as much as a lot of us with ME are. My GP prescribes medication to help with the pain, but that's it really. So
but in terms of therapeutic,
there's nothing.
No.
There isn't. I would love to see research into what causes ME, and a proper diagnostic test. That's what we need. That's where we need the medical focus to be. We don't need more CBT or graded exercise therapy. I think I think that's just that's a waste of time. And it reinforces the perception that we're just lazy.
Or that there is essentially a psychological condition which can be approached that way. Rachel, thank you very much for phoning in. We do appreciate everyone who does get in touch on this, because I've got so many messages here of people who feel so strongly they've got in touch, but also said, the level of effort that is involved in getting in touch, either by a message or phone, is so draining. So we really do appreciate it. James McRoberts, good morning, James.
Good morning, Kay.
Good morning. It's a pretty bleak picture there as described from Rachel. A sympathetic GP, but really nothing on offer. What's your situation?
This is very true, Kay, and it's very cruel. In Scotland, I'm trying to mind his name, but Sean, you spoke to there about 15 minutes ago. Sean was right in the attitude in Scotland. There's only one ME nurse for the whole of Scotland.
I think it was Dr. Charles Shepherd that was saying that the situation in Scotland isn't great.
No, well, this is it. There's one nurse, and she's based in Fife, I believe. And basically, when it comes down to GPs and stuff like that, Do you know, there's an actual group, Action for ME. It's a website. There's guides for GPs in Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland, stuff like that. But my experience was for trying to reach out to my GP was because when I was diagnosed with it, as said earlier previous, you're just left to get on with it. The word is manage. You're not told what to expect, and then all these things start to go wrong inside, and it doesn't paint a very reassuring, kind of confident, positive kind of future for us.
How long have you been affected by it, James?
It was mild to moderate up until 2011, 2012, and then it just a lot of things happened too soon, too fast, and since then it's just kind of snowballed and got worse.
So, in terms of the effect on your life now?
Well, I used to be a really fit, active person. Within the last 3-4 years, I've just been really, really horrible and cruel, and affected me in every kind of aspect of strength, energy, to your actual being able to breathe and stuff like that, which I've problems with now, and I have done. And we're still looking for more answers with tests. But the thing is that they're recognising that this pace thing, I was one of the first ones to do that way back in 2011, and I think that's what put me in my backside, so to speak.
Right, this was trying to build up the exercise slowly. And,
7 weeks I took a 12-week course and I relapsed. I ended up in hospital about 3 times that year.
Right, and you've never regained that ground?
It's got worse, that's it, basically, yeah, and I've had to depend on more people, I've had to depend on my sons. It's an absolute joke. But I specifically asked, when this all happened, as was mentioned earlier, Sarah Myhill, I don't want to go into that too much, but people should go on that way, me, have a good look and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that was Victoria who said that had been helpful for her. And of course, you know, James, I well imagine that people who have this condition, have had it for a long time, will have done a phenomenal amount of research. You will have been all over the internet. You will have followed up everything that you possibly can, and who wouldn't in your situation. Clearly, from our point of view at the BBC, it's not our place, and it wouldn't be responsible for us to be pointing people in any particular direction. But James, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go back to Charles for a second, and Dr. Charles Shepherd, and again, to be responsible about this, Charles, you know, we should not be in any way suggesting to people that these nice guidelines are failing them. They've given us a statement from Professor Peter White, who's saying, they don't help everyone. We do need research, but we have found they're more effective and as safe as specialist medical care and therapy. That's their position. We cannot ignore, however, the people who are getting in touch with us and saying
I think
it's not working.
One must add, I mean, our position is that we as a charity do not believe that the NICE guideline is fit for purpose, and we are supported in this by a number of medical colleagues as well. There are other doctors clearly who believe that the NICE guideline is fit for purpose, and that's why the NICE guideline continues as it is. But I mean, listening to the stories from James and Rachel, it's this dreadful combination of people either being given no advice following their diagnosis, no meaning management advice, or even harmful management advice. And this is a completely unacceptable situation for people in Scotland. I'm going to toss something in here which people may feel that they ought to comment on, but several years ago there were actually political initiatives taking place in Scotland. There was a cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament trying to get something done to improve the situation. In relation to the Scottish Good Practice Statement that I mentioned earlier that I helped Gregor Purdy with, I've got here in front of me, I dug up my old file on Scottish affairs from 2007, and I've got here a letter which was written to Nicola Sturgeon when she was Cabinet Secretary for Health in July 2010, pointing out these problems. And as I say, the situation in Scotland has gone backwards rather than forwards.
Well, we can only ask for people's experience this morning, and Charles, and that's what we're doing. And my goodness, people are responding in absolute droves. We've got 10 minutes left on the programme, so we'll speak to Carmel right after this.
Get It On with Brian Burnett.
On tonight's Get It On, I'm after your favourite shower songs. Last week, Bruno Mars revealed he likes to soap up listening to Harry Nilsson. But who do you sing along to as you get clean? Maybe it's this 70s disco classic. Or is it an empowering anthem? Grab a towel and come and join me for your favourite shower sing-alongs on tonight's Get It On, only on BBC Radio Scotland.
Get It On, playing the songs you want. Monday through Thursday from 6:30.
This is Kaye Adams with you up until 12. We're talking about this apparently baffling and certainly debilitating condition called ME. Carmel, good morning, Carmel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for phoning in. Where are you with it, Carmel?
Well, I used to be an advanced personal trainer and sports therapist and do triathlons all around the country. So I've always been ultra fit all my life, and I ended up catching viral meningitis twice within a year. And I ended up, I never fully recovered, and then I got diagnosed with ME 3 years later of trying to get my health back. And then I had mild ME then, and then I was made to do CBT and graded exercise, and each day I had to improve my fitness level, and I had to stay every day, no matter how I felt, I had to keep going. And what I was given was something like an 80-year-old would be given for exercise. But I was determined that I was going to get fit again because I so love sports. Even today, I can only just watch it. So I tried the exercises and I kept going, and I felt I was going downhill, but I still pushed through. And come the 2-month mark, I crashed severely and ended up with severe ME. So now I'm housebound and mainly bedbound, and I've been ill for 15 years now.
God.
And it was the graded exercise that finished me off. But as advanced personal trainers all know around the country, that if you've got an immune system or virus, you shouldn't train. Of course, back then I was quite naive about ME. Because you're left that there's only you. You feel because of all the stigma, you're not told that there's hundreds of you out there the same. And it's like on the ME chat room on Facebook, there's thousands of us all in the same boat. It's quite horrific.
What was the medical response then, Carmel, when you followed the advice that you were given to the letter, and clearly you had an adverse reaction to that? What was the response?
At the time, I had a doctor, Dr. Shamim. He was fantastic, and he actually wrote a letter of complaint to about doing pace and get what I was recommended. And then their answer was, we're do phone calls to me. I'm not well enough to go or do anything, so they'll phone me up daily. And I was imagine you're in bed. You can hardly move. You're like now. I'm ever so weak. That's why my voice is like this. And they'd phone you up and they'd say, right, today you've got to take it easy and you've got to learn to rest, read a book, do this, do that. Don't spend too much on the internet. Don't spend too much on the phone. And I had to say, I can't do any of that. I can just about lift a glass to drink a bit of water and eat half a sandwich today. That's how it was. And so he wrote again and said, you absolutely do nothing for severe ME. And they put me there. I followed the NHS advice.
So have you found anything over these years, Carmel, to help you?
All I can advise everybody is you have to rest. Rest is your only hope, and stay positive that Invest in Me come out with the latest research, because they're spending thousands of pounds where there's loads of us with ME that have all ourselves all pushed for biomedical research for us all. that's my positiveness is I'm trying to help them to help us all.
Well, respect to you, Carmel, that you would say to stay positive because, that's clearly a very bleak experience that you've had there.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it with us. Well, let's speak to William just before we have to wrap up. Good morning, William.
Good morning.
Good morning. I believe it's your wife that has suffered from ME. Is that right?
My wife has suffered from ME since 1987.
Wow. And
the first signs when going to work, she fell off a bus. And then this fatigue situation. Fortunately, one of the local doctors, we lived in Kirkintilloch at the time, and the local doctor said there was a group in Bishop Briggs, but she was recommending she go for tests at Rockhill in Glasgow. And after quite a number of weeks, it was discovered she had Coxsackie B virus.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, and I must say, I'm really quite disappointed with Scotland hasn't even improved from those days. The groups were meeting in different places where consultants, there only was about 2 who specialised in ME in Scotland at the time, and they were held in Portshaw's halls. And it's then you realise just how widespread this disease is.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite shocked when I saw the different situations people were in.
I mean, presumably, it has an effect on the entire family.
Oh, of course. My wife had to give up her job. Some nights I was working, I would have to carry her up the stairs. Having had the results, we had tried recommended herbal treatments. They were quite expensive, and nothing seemed to be helping. But through time, when we come back down into the 90s, we were in touch with the ME group in Kilmarnock, and then we got a letter in from a young student who asked, they were looking for anybody who had been on holiday recently in Crete.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been on holiday in Crete in 86.
Yeah. Well, William, listen, I apologise. It's just we've got a couple of minutes left, that's all. And I'm really keen to get to the conclusion of your story.
Well,
so
the conclusion is through time and through diet and through her own programme of exercise, she's coping beautifully today, and she's 70-odd.
Right, my goodness. Oh, well, a story of hope to finish
like
with.
To get a little encouragement to people. That is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, absolutely. But that was really through your wife's kind of self-management, was it, William?
It was, her diet, everything. Yes, this is what's helped her greatly.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear it, and thanks for calling in to give us a positive note to end on, because, frankly, it's pretty grim. I mean, we have got less than a minute left, but Dr. Charles Shepherd, if you were to identify, and clearly the ME Association's a charity, you've got a particular point of view, but what would you say the priorities are?
The priority is research, and I think to end on another positive note, I mean, we are funding now to challenge this very seriously flawed model of causation that the PACE trial is based on. We're funding 4 studies into mitochondrial muscle research. We're funding a meeting in Oxford, the University of Oxford, in December on this. And our Christmas appeal this year, going back to the research we talked about last time on metabolomics, identifying these chemical signatures in the blood, our Christmas appeal this year will be for a research study carried out in Oxford, trying to replicate these very important American findings that we discussed last time.
Right, okay. Charles, thank you so much again for joining us this morning, and thanks for everyone who called in. Fascinating, if frightening.